Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody. Coast to Coast, This Week in America. Return to Eden by Richard Taylor is the second book in the Eden Trilogy, linking the multi-award-winning Eden Lost with origins in the Philippine-American War, 1868 through 1901. It's followed by Almost Eden, set in and after the Vietnam War. Each book has a generational link carrying forward family mythology, characteristics, and historical precedents. Colonel U.S. Army retired Richard Taylor writes of love and war. Prodigals, a Vietnam story and autobiography, was published in 2003, and the manuscript was a winner at the Pikes Peak Writers Conference, then a featured selection of the Military Book Club. Homeward Bound, American Veterans Return from a War, Comprehensive Veterans History, first published in 2007, republished in 2009 as a featured selection of the Association of the U.S. Army, and it was one source for the PBS four-part series, American Veteran 2021. His current hits include Eden Trilogy, Eden Lost, Return to Eden, and Almost Eden. Return to Eden, by the way, finalist for the Eric Hoffer Award and finalist for the Georgia Author of the Year. And that's the primary focus today, talking about Return to Eden, and the author Richard Taylor is with us on the program. Colonel Taylor, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Rick, and it's a pleasure to be here.
You have written so many, I mentioned just some of the work that you've done there that's been published and receiving rave reviews, multiple awards for the Eden series. Before we do that, you've got a picture. I want to talk about this. This is a picture of your military career. What from the Stars and Stripes after a mail drop? What do we see here?
Yeah, this is in Vietnam, so it's probably a closer picture to Almost Eden, the last book. But it was intended to show that war is a dirty business. I mean, my buddy and I, Tommy Adams was the assistant operations officer, and I was the S2 in a battalion, and we were digging a sleeping bunker right next to the command post. And so we were taking a break there because the Stars and Stripes had just come in. The mail drop had just been dropped, and the Stars and Stripes came in. So we got a happy look on our faces.
Well, yes.
So basically, we were digging an underground bunker and putting a cover over it, and right next to the Tactical Operations Center. It kind of shows that war is a dirty business, and that was my intent of that. My father was I was born right after Pearl Harbor, and my father was a bosun's mate on one of the Navy's smallest ships, but the most heavily armed. And their job was providing close-in direct fire support for the Marines and Army to go in ashore on the amphibious operations and assaults, including the Philippines near the end of the war. And the book that we're featuring today, Return to Eden, was dedicated to my uncle, Technical Sergeant William Murray McLeod, who was a radar signal warning operator of Japanese air attacks that were coming in to hit our ports and defensive installations. And so they would recognize the Japanese flights coming in, they take them under fire. And I saw a couple of pictures of him. He was in Borneo, New Guinea with MacArthur, and then with MacArthur over to Luzon. Although he wasn't a fan of MacArthur, he was there with him. He
Yes.
returned with MacArthur to Luzon. But I saw a couple of pictures of him while he was on service overseas, and he was so skinny. I first thought he was a POW, and so I had to go back and do some career. I found out no, they just didn't have much to eat.
It's amazing stories, and what you've gone through, the education, the military background. What influences does that have on? What influences you the most, in particular with your writing?
I'm a big believer in education, both military and civilian education. But I'm probably more influenced by the experience, especially the experiences I had in Vietnam,
yes.
Philippines, NATO, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and the interaction with the people who were there. So education helped me understand some of the things I was seeing and doing, and also helped me be better able to express my feelings about those things.
The book we're talking about, it's one in the trilogy, the series, the Eden Trilogy series. This book is Return to Eden by Richard Taylor, our guest and the author. You'll find the book wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, urlinkpublishing.com, and you can go to Richard's website, richardtaylorbooks.com, to get information on all of the books, Eden Lost, Return to Eden, and Almost Eden. Richard, what was it that prompted you to write, especially the Eden Trilogy? Where did this come from?
It really came from my experience in the Philippines. I was there for a year as a commander of the Joint Military Assistance Group of the Philippines. And while there, I was fortunate enough to have a very close association with a lot of high-ranking military officers, both U.S. and especially the Philippines, and also political people like the ambassador and a number of top other officials in the embassy, and also some lower level officials within the Philippine Army. I had a Philippine security platoon and a Philippine aide that I communicated with a lot. And so as I talked to those people, especially some of the high-ranking Philippine military, some of them had a very strong view that Americans had been there to occupy from the time that Dewey was there, and to sink the Spanish fleet. They expected him to just turn around and leave and give them their independence, and we didn't do it. And some of them were wondering, why did America, who freed the slaves, why did they freed the people in Cuba after they ran the Spanish out, but they stayed in the Philippines? So there was some resentment to that, although they appreciated everything we did to help them with military assistance. As a result of that, I saw there were conflicting views about the Americans and the Filipinos, and they had different views of the situation between our two countries. And I wanted to express that in some way, and that kind of led me to Eden Lost, where I wanted to express those general ideas through the characters that were developed in Eden Lost. And then the book carried over to Return to Eden, because at the end of Eden Lost, one of my readers said, I like the book very much, but I want to know what happened to Joe Armand, who was the leading male character. And I was thinking that I kind of want to know what happened to him also. So answering that question took me several years and a whole new book, which was Return to Eden.
And then came Almost Eden. Talk briefly about that, then we'll go back to Return to Eden. But now this finishes the trilogy, right? This is the last one. It's
a trilogy, yeah. Almost Eden is the last one. The one we're talking about today is Return to Eden. That's the middle book. So it kind of connects the beginning, the roots in the beginning to the ending.
The book is, this one in particular, is Return to Eden. You'll find the book by Richard Taylor at his website, richardtaylorbooks.com. You'll get information on all the books, and you can order them there as well. How long did it take you on each of the books? In the beginning, you had to develop these characters. Now you have to continue with the characters. The characters come alive in your storytelling, and it's such a fascinating read. How long did it take you for each of these books?
Well, the first book was obviously the longest. It took a long time because I was trying to reconcile my feelings about the differing views between the Americans and the Filipinos about our relationships. And then I was also putting together a story. So I had to do a huge amount of research on the Philippine-American War, starting with the Spanish-American War and then the Philippine-American War. So it took a lot of research. Plus, I hadn't done something like this before, and so it took a long time. There's several years just in trying to put it together. But then once I did, and I was somewhat satisfied with that, then it led me to doing Return to Eden, and it also took a while. Even though it was closer to my living time frame, I had to do a lot of research in order to get it correct.
Talk about the main characters. You touched on Joshua. Who were the main characters in the Eden Trilogy?
Well, the characters basically change, although there's some carryover because the characters grow up. It begins with Josh Armand, and he was the son of a wealthy shipping magnate, and he went to the Philippines with Dewey because he was a steam engineer expert, and Dewey's steam engineer was new at that time to the Navy. And so Dewey was uncomfortable going without a steam engineer on board. And so he asked Josh to accompany him, and he went there and was able to see the battle where Dewey sank the Spanish fleet. And then as soon as he went ashore, he met this woman named Isabella Germain, who was she was a Spanish, she was French and Filipino combined, and she was a mysterious character somewhat. She was a mystery to him, but they became very close very early on. Then later in their relationship, they began to have some problems because they had deep cultural differences, and so they lived through those, fell in love, started off on a venture of trying to save the Philippine president from the Frederick Funston, who was an American general who just couldn't be stopped. He was undeniable. He was going to get Aguinaldo, and so that turned into at the end of that, it turned into the question of what happened to Josh, because something happened to Isabella. They didn't get married. And so the question came up of what happened to Josh after this was all over. And so I ended up having to come up with some ideas on that story and do a lot of research also on World War II in the Philippines. And I was focused on the guerrillas in the Philippines, the Filipinos, because I was still wanting to express that relationship between the Americans and the Filipinos. And so the two characters there were Josh's son, Joe Armand, and he met this Red Cross nurse named Luci Blake, and they fell in love. But just about the time the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the Philippines, they ended up having to escape into the jungles. They got split up, and they ended up both fleeing into the jungles, and they ended up with a guerrilla regiment run by a Filipino. And they were there for 4 years praying for MacArthur to come save them. But they had noteworthy jobs within the regiment, the guerrilla regiment. And at the end of it, they had a baby. And of course, the baby is the one who carried on over into almost Eden.
It's so interesting what you've done with the characters and the next generation of characters as the Eden Trilogy evolves. This book is Return to Eden by Richard Taylor. All of the trilogy available wherever books are sold. I'll send you to Richard's website because information there on Richard and all of the different books in the series. And you can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on there as well. In telling this story and continuing to tell this story, were there times when you had that writer's block where it's like, okay, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to go next? And a lot of research went into this. Let's talk about the writer's block. Did this story flow, or were there times when it's like, okay, where do I go now?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it writer's block, actually. Sometimes you get stymied because you're not sure where the story is going.
Yes.
And how best to tell it. So what I would do is go back and read what I'd written. Sometimes it'd be that chapter or a few pages. Sometimes it'd be go back and read the whole book written so far. And then I would let the characters, I fell in love with my characters in each of the books. And so I'd let the characters kind of tell me where they thought this should go. And I would try to write. I would dream about it. I would sit at my computer and watch and listen and read what I'd written. And the characters would actually talk to me, and I could hear. I couldn't hear them talking, but they would whisper in my ear, so to speak. So they would tell me if I was going wrong, or they'd tell me if I was going right. And I'd just turn loose sometimes and let them tell the story. And then I'd go back and read it, and I'd say, well, that's surprising. I didn't, I didn't know we were going to do that. But you'd read and rewrite and reread and rewrite over and over again until you're satisfied, and then you do it all over again. So it takes a lot of time, but you have to believe in your characters if you're going to write a book like this. And I believed in mine. I felt like they were part of my life.
Well, and that's a secret of the success of the Eden Trilogy. I mentioned all of the awards that all of these books have received, and you read the reviews, and it really, you bring history alive. We fall in love with these characters. We know these characters. You bring them to life in the pages of your book. I mentioned research too, and you mentioned it a number of times. How extensive was the research for doing this? Because it's fiction, but it really is all very believable.
Yeah, you have to do a lot of research, and of course, the research I did for the first book, Eden Lost, I had to go back into the archives in some cases and read some things that aren't really available unless you really go dig for them. In the second book, Return to Eden, there had been quite a few books that had been written by people who survived this experience, and so I had read a lot of them, especially people working with the guerrillas in the Philippines. And so that was a little easier, and it was more interesting because it just grabbed me. And so I lived with the characters and put them in the roles. And some of the people in these books I brought forward and folded them into Return to Eden. So it's a historical fiction because I used some. I took some license with some of these characters to make them a little different than they are in their own books, but I've tried to follow them as close as I could and keep the story going the way it's supposed to go.
When you grow that close to these characters, and you obviously have, and there's a story that you want to tell, and you tell it so well, how difficult is it to say, okay, it's over with now?
It's difficult. It is difficult. In fact, I couldn't say it was over with after Eden Lost because what happened next was left there on the table right in front of me, telling me I had to answer the question. So I did that, and then after we did Return to Eden, I didn't want it to end there either because it had some future to it. And when the baby was born, I said, well, this is what carries us forward into the Vietnam era, because she'd be about the right age. She was about my age at the time, and she would have carried us into Vietnam as a Red Cross, not a nurse. Her mother was a nurse in Return to Eden, but she went over as a donut dolly and established a relationship with an Army lieutenant. And so it kind of carries forward. But when I got to the end of Almost Eden, I knew it had ended. That was the end, and so it stopped there. And I didn't write anymore after that.
Are you writing anything now?
No, I'm not. In fact, those books came to an end, and I'm not at my age and with my disabilities. I'm not able to do too much writing anymore. I've got the VA assigned me 100% disability from exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam, and I've got a lot of other difficulties like arthritis and things that are slowing me down a lot. I used to be a fast mover. Now I'm a turtle.
Well, you've done such a wonderful job with this, and you talk about a bolo, and I don't know if you have one with you there.
Yeah, I've got. In fact, in Return to Eden, the bolo becomes a very prominent part of it.
Oh, good.
This is a display. This is a antique bolo that the ambassador in the Philippines gave me on my birthday, but it represents a lot of the action that takes place in Almost Eden. You see how it's shaped.
Yeah.
It's like, and it was used. These were used mostly for farming and for war, and it was used in a war-type manner by Luci Blake, and it really catches your attention. There's another one here that's It's a similar, but it's more of a machete bolo. It's a lot longer,
yes.
a lot longer and a lot bigger. But it was presented to me also in one of my trips in the field. And so I was never a knife collector, but I ended up with quite a collection of knives when I left the Philippines.
Well, and if that's an example, you do have quite a collection. And by the way, the video version of our interview you'll find on YouTube. Just Google it there or go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us videos, and you will find it there as well. The book series highlights the relationships between Americans, Filipinos that carries through all of the trilogy series. And Richard, we've got just a few minutes left in the program. What do you hope the readers take away? People listening to the interview, people who have read the series, what do you hope the message is that stays with them?
Well, I hope they'll be interested in what I've written about the Filipino and American connection and about our history. A lot of people learned a lot about our American history in the Philippines with the first book, and the second book also because it was unusual and it talked about the guerrilla so much. So I'd like people to pick up at least one of the books and read it. And if they do, they'll probably want to read the other. So grab Return to Eden and read it, and be prepared for a rough ride. And there's some heartbreak in it also, but it applies to all the books in the trilogy, the fears and tears, I call it. So I've read both of them. I've read all of them several times, and every time I feel the same fears, and I end up with the same tears at the end. So it doesn't matter how many times.
It's interesting, and you know where it's going. So it's an author that really puts total self into writing. One review says, the sometimes brutal story is also heartwarming and illustrative of love in war. And you tap on all of those emotions with these wonderfully drawn characters that you present us in Return to Eden. That's one of the trilogy. You've got Eden Lost, Return to Eden, and Almost Eden. All the books available wherever books are sold. Send you to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, urlinkpublishing.com, and to Richard's website, richardtaylorbooks.com. Richard, it's been a pleasure having you on the program, learning about the background in your fascinating military career and career in the private sector as well. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Well, thank you, Rick. I've enjoyed it very much.
It has been our pleasure. Richard Taylor, author of Return to Eden. You'll find information on all of his books at richardtaylorbooks.com. Of course, a link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. We're back on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, Associate Producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, Segment Producer. Ben Watson, Webmaster. Otto Bechet, Director of Engineering and TV Production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, Executive Producer of This Week in America.